Welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast with your hosts, Sandy Verrecchia and Jennifer Long.
So welcome to another episode of Organizational Transformation Kung Fu. I'm here with my OT Kung Fu co-host, Jen Long, master coach from Own Up in Denver, Colorado. Good afternoon, Jen T. Long.
Good afternoon, Sandy Verrecchia from Satori Consulting in Toronto, Canada. How are you?
Oh, wonderful. Super excited today for two reasons. One is this, as we record this podcast, we're going to go into the total eclipse. And if you know anything about it, Southern Ontario is the hotspot for it, so which is pretty cool. So we may go really dark in the background as we're recording. Second is that we're super excited for our podcast guest, Dan Pontefract. He's an award-winning strategist, author of 5 books, and a culture change guru. And I was really fortunate to meet Dan back in 2018, which now seems like such a long time ago, where he was the keynote for a Satori conference. At that time, I think you were just launching your 3rd book, Open to Think, which is a super good book for sure as well. And I think we got advanced copies at the time. So it was a really great conference and we were really privileged to have you there. So we're talking to Dan today about his latest book called Work-Life Bloom. So Dan, welcome to our podcast.
Sandy, so good to see you again. It has been a hot minute, hasn't it? And Jen T. Long, I am Dan F. Short. It's great to meet you as well. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely a pleasure, and so excited to meet you. For those of you who are watching the video, the Work-Life Bloom, Dan's in bloom 100% visually, which is fantastic for the spring.
Yes. And the fact that you live in Victoria, it probably actually looks like that in real life.
It's pretty sweet living on the west coast of Canada. So, Jen, that's the northwest of our continent, I suppose. I can see Seattle, and that's a truth bomb right across the water here, at least Washington State. That's awesome. We're in the middle of our wonderful spring season, where it just reminds me of kind of the book cover, and we've got flowers blooming everywhere. So it's apropos.
Lovely. I do miss the Vancouver lifestyle for sure. But why don't you kick us off, Dan, and tell us a little bit or share with us how Work-Life Bloom came to be?
Well, it's a far better title, I suppose, Sandy, than Work-Life Doom, which is where a lot of my work, I suppose, winds up. It's like, what? Doom or gloom or boom is happening? Okay, so here we were as we all were, in a pandemic, and I had just put out a book because I thought it was needed in the fall of 2020. I had it about 3/4 written, and then the pandemic hit, and I sort of added a little bit to it to sort of make reference to the pandemic and why we need to be a caring, empathetic leader. And that book was called Lead, Care, Win. And I realized that whilst that book was intended and still is for leaders to become more empathic in the way in which that they lead, there was sort of the flip side to that. And that is, well, what are the conditions for a team member, a human being, to feel like they might flourish at work? And so I started going on my, to the chagrin of my much better half, Denise, wife, bike rides, these long bike rides. And that's in the sort of now we're into the fall of 2020 and into the winter of 2021. And the book's out. I'm like, there's something that has to come after this, because it can't just be about leaders. And so invariably on a early February 2021 bike ride, I'm in the Victoria, British Columbia area, and I stumble upon an absolute array, like almost like a jungle of daffodils that first week of February. I'm like, oh wow, daffodils. And it just sort of hit me. I was like, how are they thriving right now? I mean, it's wet, it's kind of coldish being 7 degrees Celsius, which I guess, Jen, is about 40-ish Fahrenheit, right? Ish. And so I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. They've managed to get through. How did they get through? How did they push through? And I started noodling the whole notion of, well, how did they survive? How are they doing this? And so then that basically came to the fast forward to the summer of 2021. And now I'm thinking to myself, well, they need help. Like those daffodils back in February need help. So what were the conditions? And so now I'm playing around with the metaphor in my head. Okay, well, actually, this is a lot like what's going on for team members and organizations. Yes, they need an empathic leader. So whatever metaphor you want with that, I don't know. But there's conditions that sort of allow these daffodils to break through. So then I started noodling, well, what's getting in the way? And that led me to realize that I gotta be honest, but for both of you, Sandy and Jen, like I'm culpable. I'm an ex-executive in large organizations. And I was for years touting terms like work-life balance, employee engagement, bring your best self to work. And I'm thinking, well, how ludicrous is that? Those are not conditions. Those are anachronistic amorphisms. Like they're not truthful. You can't be balanced, and we're proving that in the pandemic. There's no balance. You can't be engaged because you never know when a pandemic's going to hit. Like you're going to fall off a cliff or something's going to happen, and then you certainly can't bring quote your best self to work because you just need conditions to be your best. So long-winded way of saying, all right, well, those things attacked me. And so here I'm thinking about the daffodils and I'm thinking about these HR corporate things that we've put in front of our people. I'm like, no wonder people can't be engaged all the time. They can't be balanced all the time. Like we're doing this to them. So it was a long answer, but that's really what happened was over the course of pumping out a book, a pandemic, and then realizing that I'm culpable, but daffodils are thriving. So what are the conditions? Should I go investigate this? And that's when I started doing some research on the matter. I don't know if you expected that answer, but that's what happened.
it's always good to find out where the germination of the idea comes from, and
See what you did there with germination. Nice
you
work,
see,
Jen. Nice
I
work.
see you.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and what I love about the timeliness of this, I think people being corporates, people, HR people, leaders are still struggling with the workforce. They're still struggling with what are we doing? How do we get them in? How do we keep them in? I mean, so many of the clients I work with, the number one issue is around hiring and retaining and just engaging people to get the work done.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the point is that the mechanisms that we've set up in our organizations, um, we're feeling Teflon, meaning that nothing is sticking, and so there's a repelling. Now it's good for sunny side up eggs, but it's not great for human beings. Like we need to absorb and feel like we're not being cooked, and we can't be reflected, if you will. Right? We need to feel that we're part of something. We're human beings with emotions. And what I realized, the first of 5 books that I wrote, by the way, where I finally went out and did primary research. Now, it's not that I wasn't interviewing people before. I was doing that, but I mean actual quantitative, hey, what the hell is going on out there? Kind of primary research. And I discovered that like employee engagement is a lie. Like, like I'm sorry if you're like still
I'm sorry if you're
believing in
spending
these
millions
things.
of dollars with Gallup every year, but
This is exact Gallup, Blessing, White, Aon Hewitt, like all of them, right? It's just like
right.
we have executives that are pushing the employee engagement score. Oh, we've got to get our score up 5 points this year. That's our target. And you're just like, well, what if we don't? Or what if something happens, like a pandemic? Or don't you think that maybe each of us as human beings are in cycles? Like sometimes we're up, sometimes we're even, sometimes we're down.
Well, so talk a little bit about this whole mindset around work-life balance, because that's kind of the big premise, right? And mindsets are hard because mindsets eat skill sets. Like how I think about it is how I show up in it. And so getting people to think differently and change a perspective is no easy task. So let's just talk about, I've always had an issue around work-life balance. I'm a Libra. so
Explains
I'm
everything.
always like, balance is how you define balance, and that doesn't mean even Steven. So talk just a little bit about this whole myth thing around work-life balance as you see it.
Well, first of all, there's a great California beer called Merc Life Balance, which basically sums up my feelings of work-life balance. It's all murky. It's Merc life. So I am, as we record this, 52. And I spent about 7 years in academia. I then spent 18 years in the big bad corporate world of telecom and high tech in 2 different stints as an executive. And I spent the last 5 years on my own in my own little company of one. And upon reflection, and I guess hindsight being 2020, and you can look both forward and in the rearview mirror when you get to ages like this, I kind of looked back and said, wow, actually, there were loads of times that I was high, not weed high, like high. I was flourishing. It was awesome, right? I was like, there is a great integration and a harmony between what's going on with my work and what's going on in my life. But then upon reflection, I would look back and say, ooh, wait a second. There were times as well when work was awesome, but there are factors within me, like the self life, that I was like, oosh, I'm not sure about that. And then the reverse was true as well, where things about me were cooking. I was like, wow, I am awesome. I feel great. They're like good wellness, I have great relationships, good networks. But then things, quote, at work, whether I didn't understand the strategy, its purpose, I didn't feel like I belonged. That was tanking. And then there were definitely moments there, Jen, where both work and life were like, eesh. So if I can do that, and I am just a peon on this whole corporate machination of human beings in the workplace, then there are ostensibly gazillions, millions of people that are going through the same thing, meaning you cannot have an entire organization that will be fully, quote, engaged. And we wonder then, as you both probably do as well, why have the employee engagement scores remained stagnant for 25 plus years? Why have they, in North America at least, hovered around 33%? Why, in whether that's Gallup or Aons or Blessing White, it's just like, maybe we're asking the question wrong. Maybe that we don't expect to be fully balanced or engaged for your entire life or career, because we do have these cycles. We go up and down. There's acquisitions. All of a sudden now, your team of 12 that you were looking after, where you were humming and your life was happening, is like so cool. Next thing you know, you got a new boss. Your boss said, if you want to keep your job, you got to move from Denver to Palo Alto. And you've never lived in Palo Alto your life before, but you're like, I like my gig and I kind of want to stick around this company. So, hey kids, hey, whoever partner, we're going to Palo Alto. What's that gridlock on 101 called? Oh my gosh, I've never seen that before in my life. Oh my God, I don't know anybody in Palo Alto. Oh my God, I don't feel like I belong. Oh my God, my boss is a jerk. And all of the work and the life factors start crashing. You're like, well, this was a dumb idea. Why did I take the relo from Denver, which I love, and all my family's there, my friends? I like the Avalanche. They might win the cup. This is great. And now I'm in Palo Alto, and San Jose Sharks are a terrible hockey team. And now I'm like, I don't belong. So this happens repeatedly over and over and over and over again. But the reverse is also true as well. Some people, all of a sudden now, they've figured out relationships. They've figured out their sense of meaning. They got a great boss now. Strategy they understand. Maybe they took a new gig somewhere else in the organization or another one. And like, oh my gosh, I'm just like, I am flying. This is great. So my point is, I think we've been hoodwinked. That's a $25 word. I think we've been hoodwinked by a lot of different corporate machinations of language, like work-life balance and employee engagement and so on.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when you're reading your book, Dan, it talks about, you're talking about these factors, right? These 12 factors. There's work factors and life factors. And in reading it, couldn't help starting to think about how the life factors factor into performance management, because we are sort of hardwired to say, how are they performing at the work, or what's the output? This is the structure of which we're going to, give you your bonus at the end of the year. And it's not about, it's never going to be, currently, it's not about, well, Sandy's not doing so well today because her home life sucks right now, so we're going to cut her some slack. But because she's just off right now. So how do you see this connecting to performance management systems today or going into the future?
Oh, how long we got? We
I'm
got
hoping,
another
I'm
hour.
hoping you can bring another hockey metaphor in, you
Yeah.
Canadians.
Well, I wanted to know if we've got another hour to talk about performance management. This is so much fun. I mean, let's crack every single one of those ridiculous idiosyncrasies that are called HR speak. So here's the problem, right? So whether your ERP, your human capital management system, whatever, it's all focused on those work factors, or at least the objectives that relate to, well, I've got to do the work. But let's say hypothetically that I'm a female expecting mom, and I am now in my third trimester. And you can physically see that there's something different about this person than maybe the first trimester. And now you're like, I guess I should probably ease off a bit. Like, looks like they've got something growing in them. That's weird. Maybe so you can almost see that there's a physical empathy that it exudes, because you're like, oh, they're different. So I'm gonna cut them some slack because they're carrying another 20, 30, 40 pounds, whatever it is. They come back after their, well, at least in Canada, a 12-month mat leave. I know you have about a 28-hour mat leave in the US. So let's just assume, like, for a second here,
15 minutes. Yeah.
and so you're back after 12 months. And now let's just, again, it's not about weight. It's just like, okay, well, the baby's not there anymore in the belly. And so this person is back at work. Okay. So maybe you don't see the woman carrying the baby now, but are you able then to say, well, have things changed for this particular individual? And what does high performance mean now for this person? We had her as a high performer before she was pregnant, and it cut her some slack over those 9 months, but she's still, quote, high performer. And she went away for 12 months, and now she's back. And now maybe she's not exactly like she was before. Because why? Because maybe both those work and life factors have changed for her. Like, there's a different mindset. But does she have to be back to whatever it was before? Or can we figure out ways in which to work with that human being now in a way that might be slightly different? So what is her best? Well, that might have changed, is my point, over the roughly 2 years between conception to coming back from a mat leave. So that's just one example, right, of someone on maternity and how you might have, or coming back from maternity and having me thinking about the performance management plan slightly differently. You have all kinds of things that happen. So what if an individual, Sandy, is having to take care of their elderly parent? And there are all sorts of things now that go on mentally, physically, emotionally, viscerally, because they're having to deal with a parent with dementia or who's on, last days of life. There's a significant toll that individual now has to bring into the workplace. And do you think that, quote, they're going to be high performing? And what we're supposed to do, like, allow them to check their mental health at the door, and all of a sudden now everything's going to be hunky-dory inside the office doors? And so this is what I'm getting at. It's like I could go on ad infinitum with the different examples between identities, genders, age, race, you name it. And things happen in life that we bring into the workplace. And so I think we have to do a far better job of being cognizant that you cannot expect performance to be sustained at, quote, whatever that high level is defined in the performance management system. And it's unfair to expect that. And so how we've tied all of our comp and ben and salarying and bonuses and increases and title promotions and so forth based on that. It just, maybe I'm naive, but I don't see this from a long-term perspective being sustainable.
Yeah, it's I think it's a struggle in a lot of ways in terms of those factors, right? So you've got to and maybe you can walk us through just kind of the list at high level between the work factors and the life factors. You did a lot of research on all of those, and I love how you parse out the factors into some deeper layers of how they're constructed in the book. But maybe just share with the listeners what those factors are, and are there any factors, be them work factors or life factors, that are weighted more or differently, or are they just kind of all of equal value?
Yeah. So we'll go work backwards. And so, yeah, basically what I wanted to do was to hone in on what were the most important ones. And so when I was doing the data collection and the researching and the interviewing, there were a lot of things that people brought up. And I just kind of wanted to get it to, I had it at top 5 for both. And I was like, you know what? Actually, there's a 6er that I really need to kind of think about. So nonetheless, there's no prioritization per se, and I think it's going to be different for certain people and or certain organizations, right? It's just like, how does this work for me? So that being said, back to the work factors, what was pretty evident is that there were kind of 3 individual ones that I need to be seen and felt and heard from within the organizational setting, and then there are organizational ones that I need to be happening. So trust, so feeling trusted, feeling valued by your boss and your team, and feeling like you belong as part of the organization were the 3 individual work factors. And then the 3 work factors, organizational ones that were kind of more systemic and all encompassing, were purpose. Does this place stand for something more than money and bureaucracy? Norms. How do we get the work done? Is it frictionless or full of friction? And then strategy. Like, do I understand where we're heading? And am I updated? And even do I have like an opportunity to provide input and feedback? So that's the work side. On the life side, again, so there's an introspective and almost like an extrospective, like an intrinsic, extrinsic feeling here. So on the internal side, introspectively, the sense of meaning. So do I feel that I matter, and where my headspace is and who I am is actually allowed to be brought into the organization? Do I feel respected for who I am as an identity? So in community, I am who I am. I am allowed to be who I am inside the organization. And agency, which is all about free will and self-determination. Am I empowered to make decisions? Because I can at home or in the community. So how do I feel when I get to work? Am I still like, where's the decision making? Am I not like deciding on the strategic plan or the budget, but do I feel that my boss and my team allows me that sense of agency? And then for me as a human being, the last 3 are relationships. Do I have networks? Do I have connections? And how am I propped up and coached and fed that in the organization? Does my boss care about my network, my well-being? So it kind of goes without saying, like, am I well or not? And then the last one is skills. Like, do I feel like I can develop myself outside of work, but am I allowed to bring as well that into the workplace? And does my boss and my team, my organization care about the development of me? So there you go. That's the 6 and the 6 work and the life factors. And then we end up basically throughout our careers and our lives adopting one of 4 personas, depending on the levers, right, of those 12 total work life factors.
So why don't you walk us through that? Because you have a 2x2 matrix, and that sort of puts you into a quadrant at any given time. And as you say, it ebbs and flows, and you're not always in one quadrant. You have to stay in one, but it's a good starting point to figure out where you're at.
Yeah. And I guess, Sandy, I was 5 books in and I felt like a terrible author by not having a 2x2
Totally.
matrix, at least in one of my books. So I figured I better put one in. So if you're listening, think of the y-axis. That's the one on the far left over there as work, and then on the bottom, which is the x-axis, that's the life factors. And the 2x2 is pretty. I mean, it's pretty simple, but up on the top right hand quadrant, when both work and life are blooming, then you're blooming. And then any combination really that's plus or minus then gets into other kind of denotions. So if you are thinking about the top left quadrant, so work is going pretty good, but you're not sure about yourself, you're budding. And I think a leader has a lot to help with on the development of the self or helping you to become who you might want to be, whether that's your wellness, your agency, etc. The opposite of that on the bottom right is when you're very clear on who you are. So you've got high skills, high respect, etc. But there are some work factors. Maybe you don't understand the purpose of the org. Maybe you don't understand the strategy anymore. Maybe you don't feel trusted. New boss situation, new team, right? New dynamics. So you're stunted is the name of that persona. And then rather than being totally negative like Gallup, et cetera, whom, it's basically the building's on fire, you're chronically disengaged. I look at it as part of those daffodils. There's a renewal. And so that's the persona that I decided to use on the bottom left. When work and life seem a bit confusing, then you're just in need of renewal. And that's totally fine. We can all appreciate that we all go through phases in our work and our life where we might be in renewal.
Yeah, I really love the whole renewal thing because I'm going to double down on that in that it does, especially from a coaching perspective, because there's always opportunity. There's always opportunity. And when you're in that place where it's not working for you, what is the opportunity? And so I love the whole idea of renewal.
Yeah, thank you. And I decided, talk about a masochist. I decided to, as for my next book, to go dig deeper into that phase, into the renewal phase. And so there's a whole book that's going to come out that say, okay, well, why does this happen? How can loss turn into gain? And how do I really figure out some of the ways in which to sprout from the soil out of that renewal phase? So I felt, even though the book's 90,000 words, Work Life Bloom, I felt I needed like a 35,000 word book that really helps that particular phase.
Well, it's really good, and what I like about your work as well is, as I was reading this, what went through my head. If you're familiar with Dan Pink's work on motivation, right, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, you really distill down into that, right, and explore it at a whole other level. Even so, then more so than he does, and so it's a nice compliment to just that idea, because it does. How does my internal self drive as much as the external thing that the organization is responsible for? And so Sandy and I were kind of talking about earlier too, stories of leaders. Like what is the thing that the leader needs to be? Because this is a leadership book, right? In its container. What is something that a leader should be doing immediately to shift how they're showing up in this regard from your perspective?
Great question. I mean, other than root canal, which I guess is a pun, a different type of root, right?
Yeah.
So there's a couple of like metaphorical tests that basically I'm asking leaders to conduct. One is called a soil test, and one's a water test. And so the soil test is the scanning that a leader ought to be doing of their team members, and where they're each individually at in the kind of setup of these work-life factors. So that's part one. I'll come back to really what you should be doing, but that's the soil test. It's the scanning. So where are people with trust? Where are people with strategy? Do they understand it? Where's their agency? Do they have skills? Do they need to? Should we talk about skills this month? Are you checking in on your people about what's going on in their work and their life? God forbid life, that you have conversations about their relationships and so on. But the water test, that's an inward looking test. It's just like any daffodil, right, in February is still going to need some water to flourish and to bloom. So that's that regular self-reflective test, asking yourself, well, where am I at? And how am I coming across to people if I am not blooming? Because you're still a leader. You can't fake it until you, quote, bloom it. Like, you need to be authentic with yourself in these water tests and say, well, where am I at? And then sort of like if I'm real and truthful, then I'm going to work with my team, to say, hey, here's where I'm at. I'm working on a few things myself, and just to be again that ultimately open and hopefully copacetically trustworthy type of human being. I'll give you an example. So I come at this from practice. When I mentioned being in academia and running a team there and 18 years in telecom and high tech, during my high tech years, there was a particular point, which is going to sound weird, but hey, I'm an open book. So we had a third child, and Kate, God bless her, was not necessarily planned for, and she's lovely. She's a baker. She's so great, but nonetheless, so I go get the snip, as I call it, right? And the snip doesn't really work. Meaning it worked, but it was there was pain. Let's just put it that way, and the pain was like not great. And so what I tried to do is I tried to cover it up. Now, I'm a leader of a team running 120 people in 11 countries, a budget of 12 million, revenues of another 12, and it's like it's I learned a lot and I had a lot of fun, but my team was my team and I loved them, but I wasn't being real. And so my life factors, my wellness in particular, my agency and my respect for myself had plummeted. And I was being awkwardly weird for like a good 4 6 weeks. And then one day I came home. Basically, the doctor said, it'll go away. Just trust me, kind of thing. I'm like, oh, great. And it did eventually go away, but it took like 4 months. But around that fifth or sixth week, I finally went to Denise, my wife. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And she was the one, she's like, well, why don't you just tell them? Like, what's going on? I was like, yeah, that's really good advice. Thank God I married up. And so I basically had a session with the leadership team. I said, look, it's going to sound weird, but, I had a snippy snip. It hasn't gone exactly to plan. So I'm in some discomfort. They're giving this medication, but I'm just don't feel me. And like they all cried, they hugged me. A couple were on the virtual call, right? Back in the day. So this is like 2008. And they're just like, they're lovely. And they're like, oh, thank God you told us. And I just felt this relief and this sense of, oh, so that's a water test is my point. So I was not water testing myself as to where my own life factors were at that particular junction. It was impacting me and clearly the team. So when I did the water test and I kind of used Denise as a litmus test, say, should I or shouldn't I? And she's like, yeah, you should. It just totally relieved a whole bunch of mental anguish, even though I was still in some physical discomfort. So there's a real world example. Awkward as it might sound to both of you.
Yeah, it's all
Yeah, no,
good.
but it's interesting. Like people like Brene Brown, who sort of allowed vulnerability to creep into the workplace, and this notion of being empathetic and allowing your empathy and caring. Those are words that are fairly recently being tossed around, right? So there's a vintage, I would suggest, of people that maybe don't feel comfortable in sort of in that space. And so to cross the line and ask people about their, what's happening in your home life, how can we look at you as a holistically and help you? It'll be maybe difficult for people to actually feel comfortable in that zone because we've been told there is a line that you don't cross, right? You can be caring, but caring from afar. So what would you say to the leaders that sort of grew up in that genre, if you will, and aren't comfortable?
What an excellent question, Sandy, because I was just like thinking through with my Rolodex of exemplars. And one of the things that has dawned on me more so in the last 2 years than ever before is Gen Z. And not just because I have three of them, two legitimate and one unplanned for, but lovely nonetheless, is that they're living in a world whereby everything is shared. Everything from mass firings on TikTok to bare minimum Mondays to, you just name it. Like, they are in an echo chamber, their own echo chamber, but it's like, it's the largest echo chamber I've known to man and womankind. And they're okay with being authentic and real about what it is that's going on in their life and their work. They are the epitome of work life. And so, Sandy, what, like, whether you're millennial, Gen X, or boomer, what we need to realize is the genie is far out of that bottle. It is not coming back. And whether you're X or millennial and you've had these Gen Zs, the workplace is changing, has changed. It's never going back to a place and way in which that you can't bring your personality into the workplace. It is there. And so we can't have a line. There is no line. It's like Adam Smith's invisible hand. We now have a visible line. There's a visible hand between where we are with life and work, and the two in this integration that's actually happening. So I am so for it. Back to my 2008 example of, a slightly botched vasectomy. I wish I didn't wait 6 weeks. I'm still glad I did it. But nowadays, I think that we need to be real, more authentic. And I know you alluded to Brene and team about being that vulnerable and empathic individual, because that's actually an expectation of what the younger generation have been taught. We've raised them this way. So they're just doing what we taught them, and they're doing it in a way where we're like, wow, good?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. It's funny. I do a lot of leadership development training, and they always are like, oh, these new people and these young kids, and I'm always like, hey, you raised them. You raised those kids. I know you weren't expecting what you got, but now you're gonna have to deal with the work environment that you said they should have.
Yeah.
Right. So careful what you bake, I guess, right? Like,
Exactly. And as you were giving that whole example, I kept thinking about the whole thing in the US where was it the Secretary of Defense who was hospitalized for prostate cancer and didn't tell anybody, and everybody's like, where is he? And then everybody was like, why didn't you just tell us?
exactly. That's exactly what a wonderful example, because everyone was like, duh. What were you? So that line. So there was the predilection that there needed to be a line, can't cross it, and like my personal life is my personal life. And okay, there are certain situations you're certainly not going to bring up, but when you go AWOL and you're the sec defense, you're just like,
Yeah, we
I
got
don't
a
know.
problem. Yeah. Yeah.
That advice, perhaps.
Be more authentic there.
Yeah. One of the things, just an add on to that, was Jen and I were talking in advance. So you have this generation of people that sort of expect it, right? Because we raised them and we want them to be open and authentic, and we've allowed them to be, and we've praised that. The tone from the top, though, may be different and may not appreciate that openness and that authenticity. And so you may have, could there be a time where you have a disconnect of middle managers that are feeling that this is the way to lead, and upper management that is not really praising that work ethic.
Sandy, you are just brilliant, and that's exactly some of the things that is happening inside of medium to largish organizations these days. And what I'm seeing and feeling and dealing with in some of my consulting work, et cetera, or some of my workshops, Jen, that I do. Middle management, right, are like, oh yeah, corporate. Just forget what it's up there, like the execs. Highfalutin 1%ers or 0.1%ers. Here's the real thing. We're real. Like, we have a mortgage. We live in a condo. We live in a duplex, right? We're renting. Like, they're real people having real conversations with their team. Like, don't worry about the C-suite. That's just like, let's play lip service to what it is they're yapping about, and we'll just play along their game. It's called managing up. You two know that. And they're actually having the more humanistic, rapport building type conversations and camaraderie with their team than management. Those people up there, the C-suite. It's happening everywhere. It's kind of pervasive.
Yeah.
It is, and it's interesting because I always find that these what you've written about is brilliant in the sense of it does really tap into this question people have about what are we doing about the workforce, and really how are you shifting your perspective about where we are now, because we're not going back. We can only go forward. And how are we incorporating the value centers of the people that we're bringing in to do the work? And once again, the softer skills are the harder skills to actually execute, but will have the greatest impact relative to your culture, your outcomes, right? Your future as an organization.
Your engagement.
Your engagement,
Sure.
if you still want to measure that.
Not up to
Well,
today.
and I do want to be clear. Like, I'm not yet sold on the fact that Gen Zs are going to be awesome leaders. So jury is out on that. What I am saying is that they have an expectation that we have taught them to be transparent and open and kind and altruistic and purpose driven and take care of the planet and your neighbor. Like, we've done, well done, Gen X, right? And millennials, older millennials, with raising and pumping out these kids. But that, I'm not saying that they are the best leaders today. I'm saying their expectations of what a workforce is, and young millennials as well, I kind of lump them into Gen Zs. That's the thing that's changing. And so when you look at demographically where we are at in our organizations today now, with 4 generations in the org, and the weaning off of boomers and Xers now sort of taking the limelight of the more senior roles, et cetera, I do think that it is Gen X's time. As much as they're forgotten and they seem to be ridiculed with the Breakfast Club, this is not a time to shy away from Gen X flexing the muscle of what does actually leadership mean. And I think, being a Gen Xer, that we are the interlocutors, right? We are the translators between what we said we wanted as parents and what we produce, but now we've got to make the change in the organizations. And Sandy, to your point about the line, I think we need to redefine that line. That's our job as Xers.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Well, excellent. Dan, thank you so much for spending the time and talking about your book with us. Here's the cover for those of you who are watching the video.
It's not even about the book, although this is lovely to bring up, but it's the discourse we just had, right? I mean, the book is a framework, I suppose, but there are some serious things I think we're getting right, and there's a lot of things we're not. And I think our discourse today was proof to that there is some progress, but you got some itchy feet out there, and I think we do need to change a few of those sacred cows, whether they're lines in the sand or employee engagement surveys or what have you, because I do think the nature of how organizations operate is changing, and it will continue to, and we're going to run into some serious friction if we don't.
100%. Kind of there. So where can people pick up your book? All the places?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, use your hands. You can pick it up with that. You can, the easiest way, go to worklifebloom.com. You can find every audio, EPUB, physical version to your heart's content. And might I say, this is a bit of Canadian pretentiousism, which we don't usually do, but the book just won the Axiom Gold Medal award this year for the business book, and pretty thrilled. That just happened last week. So new news to you.
New news. And there's an online assessment that you do, yes?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to find out right now, I mean, again, these things change, but if you're renewal, budding, stunted, or blooming, worklifebloom.com/assessment will get you there as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Dan. You brought some sunshine into my life. I'm staring at this flower. It's just making me happy. So thanks again. And Sandy, any other comments from you?
Yeah, pleasure to see you again. Thank you so much for writing this book. I think it's giving us a lot to think about, and I would encourage people to read it and really give thoughts to both sides of work and life, and how do we integrate them better. I think it's a lot of food for thought.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks, Jen. Great to meet you. Great to see you again, Sandy. And thanks for pushing this conversation. I think Like more needs to be done, but appreciate the fact that you two are pushing the way for all of us as well. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. You can check out Sandy's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI consultinginc.ca. And visit Jen's website at own-up.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.